Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Mark Hoover. Coach Hoover is the Director of Athletic Performance at Metrolina Christian Academy in Indian Trail, North Carolina. He has spent time as a football coach and strength and conditioning coach before moving to full-time strength and conditioning in 2015. Coach Hoover holds a bachelor's degree in communications and physical education, and along with coaching, he works as a consultant and author for Simplifaster. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm glad you could make time and we could sit down and have a conversation about everything at Metrolina.
It's Lina, like Carolina, Metrolina. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I appreciate you correcting that.
Oh, no, it's okay.
It's that Midwestern way of reading things, I guess.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's yeah, everything's going great. Really, everything's fantastic. We're in they get 1 week of spring practice here in the private league. Public school, they get like a month or something where they can practice so many times. Privately, you can have OTAs, but our schooling is like 480 kids, so most of the boys play multiple sports. We got volleyball and baseball and such, track. So we did our OTAs on Saturdays. This week has been first week of actual football, and that's I primarily work with our football program there. I do work with our other athletes because the classes are not sports centered as they were my previous position, but my primary role was with football. So once this started, I'm kind of knee deep.
Well, I'd seen that I'm fairly new to Twitter, but I'd seen that you had posted some stuff about your practices. It looked like everything was going pretty good.
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's definitely a different experience when you go into the private school. At least it has been for me. It's been a pleasant surprise for sure after kind of being in public education for 20 some years. It's a little bit different, and I guess it's hard to compare. I've not seen who our opponents are, but I'm pleasantly surprised with all of our athletes. I mean, our spring kids, I really helped a lot with track and baseball, and all of our spring sports either won a conference championship or finished second, and the one that finished second ended up ranked fourth in the state. So that it's a pretty strong athletic tradition there, and it's really a great place to be.
So in the private realm, it looks, like read some of your stuff on Simplifaster, your access to technology is maybe a little better than what it was in the public sector.
Well, that's the nice thing about working, what my actual full-time job is working with Simplifaster, which I started in 1st of February, working from home. And I'll get back to technology. I'll just tell you what's going on that kind of led to the technology. So December 14th, I think, was my last day at York. I went out for shoulder surgery, and I had no idea that I wasn't going to come back. I'd been working part-time for Simplifaster, and that was a lot of the technology that I had at York was because of Simplifaster. Some purchased, some they loaned to me, some I was using to test some things, but then when they offered me a full-time position working from home, really good job, I decided to go ahead and take it. And before I was due back from my shoulder surgery, I was working full-time Simplifaster, and that part of my contract with them and part of my deal is that my value to them as a consultant and as someone that can do the things they need me to do is really that I'm coaching at the high school level. So I was able to reach out to a friend of mine who's the head football, and ironically, he was the strength coach. He still is. They hired me in a different position, director of athletic performance, but we kind of made that work so that I'm there semi full time, kind of like athletic trainers hours, but that is really where a lot of the technology becomes available. Is that um, I can use anything that Simplifaster has. So all of the technology, there was no technology at Metrolina when I got there. They didn't even have a jump mat. And now we have multiple velocity based training, things. We have jump mats, plyo mats, skyhook mats, force plates, shred mill, just GPS, which was something that was not acquired through Simplifaster, but so we've got all kinds of technology. So that's kind of where that's at. I think that that is a really great experience for their kids and coaches to kind of see. Their kids are going to go off. It's kind of like our kids at York too. They would go off and come back and say, they'd go to a small Division I school, and they come back and say, "Coach, we don't even have GPS. We don't even wear GPS." I'd be like, "Wow, our kids are using a force plate 2 or 3 times a week for different things." So but it's definitely fun to spoil them and let them see, kind of this how to train and use technology to kind of help improve that situation a little bit.
So who's getting the better end of the deal here? I mean, you get content ideas, which is your job. You got to have content, but
Yeah.
all of the things that you bring to the table have to be invaluable. I mean, you could do it without the stuff. Obviously, schools do, but with what you're bringing, it definitely makes the job easier and puts you on the forefront of what's going on in high school athletics.
Yeah, and I think that's, you're right. You don't need technology. That's another one of those things that I'll probably do a video about sometime. I've done a couple of videos the last couple of days about some things that were grinding my gears a little bit, but people are like, technology is a crutch, and the other thing you see, that's kind of like, I put it this way: when people were yapping about technology being so bad, I envision that in about 1906, there was a guy that was hooking up his horses and shoeing them and getting ready to take his family off in a cart, and a couple of cars go rolling by, and they're like, how can you get point A to point B without knowing how to shoe a horse, hook up a buggy? It doesn't make any sense, these horseless carriages. That's kind of the same way I think about when I see people complaining about technology, because it's a tool. Can you, and I've used this analogy in one of the things I've written before. If you're a carpenter, a master carpenter, you can build a house with tools from the 1700s, but because you're a skilled carpenter, it doesn't matter. But you don't use tools from the 1700s because you want to optimize your experience and you want to optimize your time and streamline things. So whether you've got tools, the most advanced construction tools known to man currently, or you've got, mallets and those square nails they had back in, I mean, you're still going to build a great house. So as long as you, understand how to coach and have a great why for everything you do, the technology on top of it is just bringing more information to help you make optimal decisions. I don't need I just got force plates a couple of weeks ago. I don't need force plates to train, but you know what? Tomorrow we're going to put all our football players on there, and we're going to do a kind of a hamstring test. Later in the week or early next week, whenever the next time we train, we're going to do some deceleration testing on the force plates, because those are things that will give me information about the athletes that can help keep them healthy and help drive training that will best fit each individual athlete, as opposed to just, writing up, hey, we're going 5x5 at 75% today. That's fine. But I have the tools now that can be a little bit more actionable And I think that is probably the future, whether people want to admit that or not. There's always going to be kind of Clint Eastwood, get off my porch, get off my front lawn, whatever that movie was, type thing toward it. But, you still see people using flip phones, which is fine. If that's what they want to use, a flip phone. I'm not going to use one because I've got the new iPhone and I like it better. And it's for me. So I'm definitely not going to say that you need technology for sure, because you don't. But it's just something that helps you make the best possible decisions.
No, and that makes sense. And in there, you talked about some Twitter posts you've made over the last few days. I watched one today. You were talking about the 1-rep max.
Oh yeah,
and I thought that was really good. It's like the majority of society right now. If you don't agree, that's fine. Or if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But don't be mad at somebody else because they want to do something different.
I know. Yeah, it's it's such a silly thing to argue about, and it's really less arguing, and it's more like what they call subtweeting, which I learned in the last year what that was. But people say, "Oh, this is why we max," or this is why we do this is why we do that, and they're really saying what I do is better than what you do, and that's just not true. I mean, whether you do a 1-rep max or not, I mean, I don't see how that moves the needle on anything. Like I'm not anti 1-rep max, but I don't see us doing it again at MCA unless the head football coach is like, hey, and he said he doesn't care one way or the other. But unless he just says, hey, I want to do it because, I mean, I don't need to. I've got the technology that, we can know how to load the bar. And then, or that's what people, how do I set numbers? I'm like, that's such shallow thinking. Like, if that's the only reason you're doing that, then that's probably not a great reason. But I'm still not going to be like, hey, that's dumb. No, I mean, that's why you do it. That's your why. As long as you have a why and you do it safely. And I think that's part of the problem is people get so obsessed with chasing those numbers that it becomes what your program is built around. And that's bad news. That's bad news. If your kids are chasing, like, we want to have X amount of guys that can do this, X amount of guys that can do that, X amount of guys that do that. Tony Holler said, and I'm a big Tony Holler fan. I know him well, but he said, I want to see people do things that only athletic people are really good at, something along those lines. Meaning, if someone that's not an athlete can do it really well, it's probably not a really super athletic, event. And is there anything less athletic than a 1-rep max? So I'm not against it, but I'm not all that impressed by doing it for myself because I just don't see the value in it when I have other ways to have other whys. But my whole point was, don't get mad at me about that because I'm not mad. And I mentioned a friend of mine that Dr. Eric Cash at Dorman High School. They do the one, and his kids are fantastic. Those are fun videos to watch. I'm not mad at him that he does it. I'm like, hey, that's their thing. When we were at York, it was a really big part of the culture there, like a really big part. And we had a really good kind of balance there where the head football coach wanted them to have good lifts and wanted them to do things, but he wanted them to do it right. And he would say to them all the time, we're not chasing those numbers. We're trying to do athletic things, and then we're going to test you just to see what you can express. And that was fine. It was, we had a thing going where, hey, we go to technical failure. And he would look at me, believe it or not, it got to the point where, and he was old school. he looked at me one time. We had he's going to be a senior this year. He's really, really a stud running back. He got under there and back squatted 500 pounds at like 0.57 meters per second or something. It was really like, holy smokes. And we kind of looked at each other and he said, I think 500 is enough. And I was like, I think so too. We're not proving anything by, if he gets under there and does 5'10", is all of a sudden he's going to score 3 more touchdowns next year. So I really, as long as you're doing it with a purpose and you're technically sound and you're not sacrificing, movement for load, then hey, do it if that's what you want. That's not, there's probably a good chance that I will do it again someday, whether might be at MCA, who knows? We still do assessments. We just don't do them in, like deadlift, clean, bench, and squat, because we don't really deadlift. We do hang cleans. We bench, but, and squats, we're all over the place. We haven't, literally all over the place with squats. So, and the variations we use. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there and say, like, why, like, you're seriously arguing over whether, like, why is it's just like the back squat thing the other day. I want to do the video on that too, but that is just played out. Why are people so mad that people don't back squat? Like, there's just as many teams winning championships in football and games and everything else that don't back squat as there is. There's greater. I had someone that was an actual like medical doctor be like, nothing's better for glute activation. And I was like, Doc, no way. Like, you know what? You've never been in the room with my kids. You don't know how they move. I've never been in the room with your kids, or if you coach, or, or whoever's kids. How can I make that call without looking at the athlete? I'll tell you exactly why we went away at MCA from back squats, because I came in and they were in the midst of a 6-week like workout that they had been doing, and back squats was in there, and I watched the kids back squat, and I said, this is not conducive to what type of movement I want to see. So we're going to go to split squats and Hatfield split squats, and we're going to get him in nice positions, because I'm not coaching powerlifters, and I could honestly care less about their 1 rep max. I want good football players. And some of them need to be stronger. Well, guess what? You can get stronger with 60%. Are you gonna, I told this to our kids when we first started this. You guys can back squat 300 or do a Hatfield split squat, hand supported split squat with 375. Where's the load? What's greater in the load? So, I think people just get so caught up with that. I can tell you right now, at York, I'm thinking back to 5 or 6 guys that we coached most recently that are all playing college football, all hated the weight room. All hated the weight room. When they were in 9th grade, this particular class I'm thinking of, they didn't even dress. They sat in the corner, and we had to call their parents, and we fought with them to do anything. And they're all playing college football and dominating, and they still don't love the weight room. It's just something that they do. But, I promise you, most schools would take a couple of those kids tomorrow and say, what studs they were in high school. And I got news for you. They benched like 200 pounds, like they were just great football players. So it's just such a silly argument.
There's tons of stuff to unpack in that last little bit that you went on about. So I'll try to do the best I can with kind of.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's what you want. You want to be able to have those conversations. So we can kind of look at the squat. When I first heard it and schools were doing away with the squat and all that, yeah, it took me back a little. I'm like, what? We're doing away with the squat. When you get to thinking about it, I can come to terms with and understand why. It takes very little bit of a weight shift, and it's all quads. Or, you can get away from what you want to train so easily. You got a weight room full of kids, and they're good morning half their squats. They're up on their quads on half their squats, whatever the case may be. And then now you're not getting the training effect, like you said, glute activation. Well, in that movement, you can get away from the glutes pretty quick. So by moving to an
I like,
exercise,
and I like Cody Hughes and I were actually talking about that. And he said, I'm still sticking with the back squat. We're just going to use wedges. And I was like, amen, because now you're right. Those wedges make a humongous difference in the movement. And, when I think people misunderstand when you say low back compensation, because I had somebody go on there and said, I've never seen a high school kid do it. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even understand what low back mute. When you say, I don't mute too many people, but when you say ridiculous things, I'm just going to mute you because I just don't want to talk to you anymore. And I'm thinking that was my whole reasoning. I walked in to our room at MCA and I saw us go down pretty well, not too bad, lean forward, get up on our, kind of, and then all of a sudden they're coming out of the bottom of the squat, shoulders go forward, their butt starts coming up, and now they're pushing through their back. And you're teaching your body that's the way you want it to move. And that is not how you want to start that movement, And I was at the chiropractor today and went because I just got, I'm getting old. And he said, your left hip flexor is completely locked down. You built a compensation pattern that your leg is preventing your leg is preventing you from internally rotating your left foot because it's protecting that hip flexor. And so your muscles are locked down and you've created a long-term compensation pattern. I completely understand that because that's what I'm talking about, dude. Your body's going to find the easiest way to move in the way that you are teaching it to move. So if you're going to be a low back compensation squatter and you keep doing that, your body's going to say, hey, this is the way we should move. And then you're going to start having problems. If you can teach a great back squat or you do what Cody does and get the heels up there, amen. But my job is not to prepare these guys for any type of, thank God we don't have a weightlifting competition in North Carolina. My job's not to prepare them for that. My job's not to prepare them for anything other than to perform athletically next season. That's our goal. And in my opinion, back squats was not what was going to do it. I have no problem with, again, go back to Eric Cash. I have no problem that they back squat. They're really good at back squats. So, I have no problem. But I just don't understand the anger back and forth. We do things bilaterally. We do a lot of trap bar deadlift, although I've gone to a lot of split there. We do some isometric. So we just got the safety squat bars. But before we got the safety squat bars, we were not great front squatters either. They had not front squatted before I came in. We could not possibly hold an isometric front squat into a nice rack position. So I could try to force that round peg into a square hole and say, too bad, suck it up. I don't care if your wrists hurt. We're going to be miserable because we're going to be tough. Or I could say, they know how to back squat. We can get them into a nice position and then coach them up to hold it there. So that's what we did. So we do some things bilaterally, but from just a great looking squat, nice depth. You don't have to worry about like squat depth when they're doing a split squat. They're low. I mean, it's, for my money, that's where we're gonna make our living. But you know what? If you back squat every single day with your kids, I don't care. Do it safely, have a why, and rock on. I'm definitely not going to be offended that anyone back squats. But I think it's funny that as soon as you throw out there, like Danny Foley, who's a buddy of mine, Fascia Chronicles, he threw out there and he had his reasoning, and people like lost their minds. Like, why do you care? Do you work with Danny Foley's guys? He coaches adults. You work with them? But So how do you know? It's crazy.
Yeah, you got to do what your kids can do. And a lot of kids, they're not ready for too big of exercises. You spend a lot of time just developing basic movement patterns. I
Mhm.
mean, you know, like you said, you can get to arguing over a back squat or whatever, but the kid can't even walk a straight line.
Well,
Yeah, they're not, they're just not developed like they once were because their environment they're in is not as big as what our environment was.
yeah. And you think the body knows? Like, you think the body's like, I don't know, these split squats. I don't know. I think my muscles would rather do back squat. It was like the body only knows stress and adaptation. It doesn't know anything else. So use whatever is going to work for your individual athlete because we probably have we have some that use a floating heel, some that use a tripod foot. Sometimes we instruct them on what to do. Find what each of your athletes can do really well that's going to create the adaptation you're looking for and do it. And these people that want to say you can only do this exercise or only do that exercise, I just want to look at them like, you think the body knows? I mean, I explain to our kids all the time about sympathetic versus parasympathetic and how they need to stay calm, perform, and we do RPR. I basically tell them, you think your brain knows the difference between you on the wrestling mat wrestling around with a dude or you out in the forest fighting for your life with somebody? No, it only knows stress and adaptation. So it certainly doesn't know what type of squat you're using. It's just, you know, it's just seems silly.
Well, and to go back further into that conversation, a little bit closer to the beginning, you did make a good point. You had a kid squatting 500. Well, 510, is that going to make him score 3 more touchdowns? Deciding what's strong enough and how much time you want to invest on making a 500 squatter a 550-pound squatter is the bang for the buck going to be there? Because if it's not, there's other things he could be doing that would carry over to the field way better.
There's no doubt. And I think that's one of the big issues with a lot of the whole 1 rep max discussion is athletic development coaches that are training athletes chasing some mythical number that like, we're going to go to the weightlifting meet and we're going to be able to do this. Like, congratulations. Look at the cumulative win-loss records of the teams that win the weightlifting meets. And I bet you, I don't know this for a fact, but I bet you there's as many 3 and 4 win teams that win weightlifting meets as there is state champion football teams. And the state championship football team is winning a weightlifting meet because they have better athletes than everybody else does.
Well, and those schools are all doing the same thing. You've got gym rats. I've got gym rats. That's who you're taking to the weightlifting meet. You're not taking, a kid that doesn't want to be in there. So they're going to be strong regardless.
Yeah. And so I think, chasing these ridiculous numbers, if you have a kid that weighs 190 pounds and he can back squat 400, that's probably good enough. Like, if he goes to 450 and his performance improves, great. But I mean, think about the time you might have had to spend in there. Like, I would rather spend that time teaching opening that like neural pathway highways of being able to produce force fast. And everybody will argue about that, but I can tell you right now that I can bench probably even in my injured state right now. I could do a 1 rep max on the bench press more than any of our athletes currently, even with my shoulder surgery coming back out of it. And I could grind in a VBT device down to like 0.13 and probably still get the rep. But if you put me out there on the field, I wouldn't get out of my stance before those dudes ran me over. And I say that I used to say it to kids, you can say it to kids here. If those numbers meant so much, then I should be I should be able to walk out on that football field, put on some pads at 52 years old and just like dominate people. I can't. That's, so going back to what Tony said, I'm impressed by people doing things that athletic people are really good at, not people doing things that literally anybody can do. And squatting heavy, benching heavy, deadlifting heavy, literally anybody can do that if they train. So it's just not that I'm against it. I love when our kids lift heavy and we go through things just like everybody else does. I just don't have barbell strength at the center of our performance wheel. It's a spoke that comes out. The spokes all come from the middle, and in the middle is performance, health and performance. If you've got health and performance, you can work on all the spokes. But if you put that barbell in the middle, you're probably leaving something on the table. And people are still going to win games because, let's just be honest, people want to argue about this too. The high school level, probably 80, 90% of the games at least are going to be won by the better football team with the better athletes. And that's just the way it is. Injuries, turnovers, kids not showing up, they are far more influential than what we do. All we can do is try to make our kids the best athlete they can be, but getting into some false 1 rep max is not going to ensure anything, because we have crazy strong kids at MCA because they did a lot of heavy lifting before I got there. So they were already had a pretty good base, a lot of the older guys. I have no idea if we're going to win a bunch of games or not. I go out and practice and I'm thinking, we look really good. But if we played in the league that York played in, where we had to play, there was 5 teams ranked in the top 13 last year in 4A going in, we're going to go 0-5 in those games because all 5 of those teams have vastly superior athletes than we do, regardless of what I do, what the coaches do. So it really comes down to that. So chase better athletes, chase better athletes and let that 1 rep max just kind of come along with it for the ride.
Now, I'm kind of like you. I think everybody is in their primal state. They love the big lifts. They love to see strong people move heavy weights, But I understand that you've got to make athletes too, and you got to do what carries over to the field. So in saying that, I got to read some of your Simplifaster articles, and, I had been thinking about a while and stumbled across it. Mine's obviously not as good as yours, but you can get an app for your phone that's essentially a VBT. It's not going to give you the bar path, but it's going to give you meters per second.
Yeah.
And that started making a big deal. You go in the weight room and not every night is it there.
Yeah.
So you pull your top set, let's say, you're doing a 3x3 or 5x5, whatever it is. Well, then you go back and you look at those metrics and you're like, holy crap, I just hit a 0.36. Well, there's no reason to do another set. You're not going to get any better. And if anything, you may hurt something. So shut her down. So my question in that is, on top of everything else, do you find that maybe velocity-based training is helping you auto-regulate or adjust numbers during the course of a workout to hold the injuries down?
That's the only reason we use it in reality. And the reason I use the device that I use is I've got a choice of several. But we roll with the Node used to be VMAX Pro with our athletes because it's the only one I found that develops a load velocity profile as they lift, and it suggests loads. And I can tell you that they keep tweaking it, and it is really close to what the kids did in their the 1 rep max test that they actually did do when I first came. And it keeps us where we need to be, no matter how they're feeling. Yesterday we did bench press with a drop, which for the first time. So I set their load for 0.45, but I told them to go until they drop below 0.35. And, we had guys start where some of them were getting 5 and 6 reps and some of them getting 3 reps or 4. And then they were all finishing right about 2 to 3 on their 4th set. And, that's really the main reason to use it. That's a whole nother argument. The BBT is like this advanced, like, oh, please. It's no more different than using percentages. Like you use percentages to determine load. So, hey, how about this? Let's use velocity to determine load because it's tied directly with percentages and it gives you the most up-to-date information in the moment, as opposed to, well, 4 weeks ago, this was my max. So after 4 weeks, after 4 days, that max is probably wrong and it's going to fluctuate based on how you feel. So let's use this technology that can get us to the optimal place. I can take a map. I could just start, if I wanted to, where do you live? You might be asking.
No, I live in West Central Missouri, so South Kansas City, about an hour.
So if I wanted to go to Missouri, I could kind of start driving. I guess that would be a little north, maybe just due west. I don't know. Maybe a little northwest. I could just say, hey, I'm going to get to Kansas City one way or another by just driving, and I'll see signs. And that's one way to get there. And eventually I'll get to Kansas City. Or I could get a map and plot out the way, which is kind of be like using percentages. You'll get there eventually. You might get into a roadblock. You might get into a road closure. It might, but eventually you'll get to the right number. Or you could use VBT, which is like popping your address into the GPS and it just takes you right there. And every once in a while it'll say, if you turn here, you'll cut 7 minutes off your trip. It's just a way to program what's loaded on the bar with the most current information possible.
Talking about VBT, I was kind of wondering, you're moving the weight fast, obviously. Mm-hmm. That's what you want to do. You want to keep your meters per second high. The training effect of the lighter loads at that high speed, do you think that helps create the reversal strength that almost makes it a plyometric style lift? Because I don't know, I just been running this through my head. Most kids, everybody has a spot in that lift they coast. So it doesn't really matter how fast you're going at that point, the bar's just going to go.
Yeah.
So that bottom half of like the bell curve where the eccentric switches to the concentric at that very bottom, do you think that's where your real big strength gains are coming from?
With the faster velocities?
Yeah.
I think that you're probably using those velocities more to program your body to move as fast as it possibly can in whatever task so you're really trying to develop power with those lighter loads. I think when you get into a little bit heavier, that's where you're probably going to really be developing the strength, because now you're trying to move that load as fast as you can, because at least our kids know, the faster they move it, the more it's going to allow them to add to the bar. And their goal is get as much weight on the bar. So I think we're using the lower velocities or the higher velocities for that kind of neural highway, just to like teach the body to move fast and stop the waves at the top. Like you pop up there, well, now you got to pull it back. So you have that snap. I think all those things are a benefit, but I think it comes down to, it teaches the kids to move whatever load they have on there as fast as they can move it. I can move a barbell at probably like 0.13 to 0.15. Honestly, I'm a grinder. I'm old. I've been doing it for a long time. That's still fast for me. It wouldn't be fast for Monty Sparkman at the weight that I'm using, because that dude can bench like 855 pounds, but if Monty puts 800 and some pounds on the bar and he moves it at 0.17, he's still moving it as fast as he can. So I think that really, you're really getting some great strength gains from that you're, those velocities because of that.
Yeah. It's a sprinting concept with weights.
Yeah.
You're just teaching the CNS to be faster, absorb force quicker, mm-hmm. and be able to produce and you're trying to the force velocity curve. I guess you're trying to improve all the time.
Yeah.
You want to leave the least amount on the table possible.
Yeah. I think, you look at kids and you project out whether 100% max might take place, and it does in the Node app. And if it takes place like I had a kid who came to us from a school that did a lot of powerlifting. He was a pretty strong kid, but he came to us. He was a grinder. 0.11, 0.13 on his squat. Like, he was able to move a squat projected at 0.13. Now, I don't know if he actually could or not, because his brain might have gave out, but he was a grinder. And he played like a grinder. He was slow, and like we convinced him finally to train faster, adjust that velocity when the other guys might be doing, that circummax strength 3.5 to 5. We had him at 7.5 and 8.5, and we were able to get that projected 100% max to where it was like more like 0.18, 0.19, 0.20, where according to Dr. Mann, that's about where it should be in his DBT certification. And I think that showed me that you can definitely train that more reactive explosion with manipulating the velocities. So I think it's a very important tool.
Yeah, and I love the powerlifting world. I'll compete in it whenever I can. But even I got to talk to Matt Winning the other day, and he talked about when he was at Westside, they found out that the speed day actually created a better max for him, better than anything else they could have done, that speed. And then they started with the weight that was too heavy for the speed. As they learned to dial that back, they kept getting stronger. So there has to be something to it that is producing a result that you want.
Mm-hmm. It's just giving you the best possible information in the moment, as opposed to, guessing.
So helping kids transfer the weight room through to the field. Is it strength? Is it confidence? Is it body awareness? What helps that conduit from the weight room to the field? It may be all three. I don't know. I'm just trying to get your opinion.
I think that's the missing link. I actually did a presentation with that. You got the field, you got the weight room with the barbell, and then you got the field. And I think the missing link in many, many programs, more traditional, like, we're just going to lift heavy and then we're going to go out there and run faster because of it. And believe it or not, there are still people saying that. But what's missing is a lot of that, the connection. So I think the weight room, the barbell movements are great for very general preparation. They're lifting, they're getting stronger, but in my opinion, task specific strength is probably what's going to transfer. So then you start to put them in joint angles. People say you can't train speed in the weight room. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That is definitely some 1970s stuff right there. Because, if you want them to be, you could train the forefoot, you float that heel, and now you're able to put pressure into the ground. There's so many things you can do in the weight room to kind of bridge that gap. And then you take it out into their movement skills, and you show them the proper way to move, and how you slowly start building that base up from that general strength that they're developing in the weight room. And then eventually you can kind of start peeling away a little bit from the weight room and going into the more specific things. And then still strength specific, we talk to our kids all the time about what edge to put in the ground, how to push, and why we do these things we call drop lunges. We do things we call, you do the, like the skater hops. You can do them with a little bit of load to increase there's a lot of the stuff that Cal Dietz is doing is genius, where he's putting them in extremely specific joint angles, and he's doing exercises that help take that general strength and put it into those transferable moments. And then you take them out on the court or the field or wherever, and you really, really teach how to move and what edge to feel and how to push through the edge and teach how do you transfer that strength. And then what I'm really loving right now is something I did a video about yesterday was now I go out on the football field. We've got the coaches essentially and I all on the same page talking information. And I go out there and I'm talking to kids on the side during their drills about, hey, listen, all he wants you to do here is take a shuffle into a wide base crossover. Now think about, for today, working with some of our JV guys, they were just running their routes so fast and they weren't putting their foot in the ground in the right spot to help the strength that they have transfer into a great route. So now you're out there talking to them about this is the skill. This is why we do it in the weight room. And all of a sudden you're building that middle portion, and that could be a whole show. And I'm not even a tenth down the rabbit hole that a lot of people are. You sit and listen to Chris Corfist, Dan Fichter, Cal Dietz. Those guys are in they're digging the rabbit hole. They're the rabbits. And but I think that's the area that is the most neglected by a lot of coaches. You've got the weight room, then you've got the field. And then there's this big spot in the middle where how can we transfer the weight, the strength, the general strength we're building with those barbells? Because the one thing I will tell you, and I've only ever heard one person disagree with this, most people I think would agree. When you look at your strength leaderboard, not all of those guys are great athletes or great at football. In fact, a lot of times, the strongest guy on the team is probably not he probably starts on your high school team, but I can tell you from experience, I played at a small college 30 years ago. When I walked on campus, I was the coach's favorite because I was huge. The weight room was my thing. And we go in there and test, preseason testing, and they're like, this dude is a monster. He's going to be great at football. And then when we start playing games, they're like, what is wrong with this guy? He can't move. He can't, I was probably the strongest guy in the country that only played on PAT, like, hey, we're the last 3 minutes of the game, we're emptying the bench and I go in and everyone's like, you're so much bigger and stronger than everybody. I'm like, I'm not skilled, So that's why I can say that there was no transfer for me from the weight room to the field. So every once in a while you get those guys that are just crazy strong and it transfers. But for the most part, I think that hole is where we can really make our money in there. Because you know what? The weight room's easy. Progressive overload, the team, if you're walking around talking about how great you are because you make 16, 17, 8-year-old kids stronger, you are lost. Because I could take a 6 or a 7-year-old kid and say, hey, listen, here's what I'm going to do. For the next 3 weeks, I'm going to let my football players come over to your house. I want you to take them in the woods and tell them to pick up a rock every single day and carry it. And then the next day, pick up a bigger rock and do that for 3 weeks. And then we're going to test. They're going to come out stronger. The 7-year-old, making teenagers strong, I'm not going to say there's not any skill to it, but it's probably the lowest skill activity that we're responsible for because they could do nothing and they're going to get stronger. So hanging your hat on, we have strong teenagers, congratulations. Nobody cares, so does everybody else. The weight room at this point in time is the lowest common denominator. Everybody does it. There's no football team in America that's not lifting weights and doesn't have strong guys. And you're looking at all the videos right now. Every school, we're working, we're grinding. Look at our guy deadlift. Look at our guy squat. And I do it too. The real money is what can you do beyond that that's going to let them be better football players. You look at guys, Brandon Herring, Brad Fortney, both in Alabama. I mean, I could go on. I don't want to leave people out, but you look at these guys and they are big believers in the weight room, big believers in getting guys strong, but they also are really focused on that middle part. Cody Hughes, Brandon, I guess everybody I know is from Alabama. Apparently, I just named 4 guys from Alabama, but they're all over the country. And Brad Dixon, I mean, you name it. I can start naming guys. Their goal is that middle part. You know, the weights are fun, but the weights, there's no scarcity in strength. There's none. Making kids strong, that's not a valuable resource. The valuable resources are what's in the middle and your ability to have football coaches. If you're talking football, to have football coaches that know how to practice and know how to call plays and know how to get kids motivated. You can have those 3 things. Now you're in pretty good shape, but you better have some athletes too. Because like I said, I've probably done the best job that I've ever done with a group over the last 3 months, which I hope that would be the case because you always want to be getting better. And I feel like I have, and I feel like I've got tools. But I can tell you, just like I said, if we have to go down there and play that, we play in 4A, but in the North Carolina Independent League. If we have to go down and play in the South Carolina 4A League down there where I came from, we're beat every game, no matter what I did, no matter how great our coaches are. But you still that when you're just trying to improve those athletes, that middle portion is where I think our job needs to go. And it needs to go into skill development. It needs to go into how can we take everything we're doing in our drills, everything we're doing in everything we do, and somehow connect it to the field. That's where the money's going to be made.
That's ironic you brought that up because I was thinking about that today. And then the list of names you threw out there, I would, Coach Fortney, he's awesome. He's been on the show. I hope to be able to consider him a friend. He gives me great advice and we talk back and forth. Cody Hughes, I got to talk to him earlier this week. I managed to screw that podcast up, but that was a great conversation. So maybe I'll get him back on. But yeah, what you're saying is exactly right. If you can get a kid to eat and you follow a pretty good progressive overload program, 5-3-1, something like that, and they have the best steroid in their body they could possibly have at that age, just get out of the way and let them get strong.
They could do 1x20. I mean, Tony Stewart in Iowa.
Yeah.
They win state championships and they never do more than 2 sets. I mean, so it's such I hate to keep running this horse, but I was at a clinic years ago now, and sitting behind me was a couple of guys talking, strength guys, and I heard one of them say, I don't really care what our technique looks like or how we move. I know how to get kids strong. And I was like, you want a golf clap for that? Or like a cookie? Because that is a ridiculous statement that makes you look really, really sad. Like that's what you're hanging your hat on? I got a bunch of super athletes. They're 15 to 18 years old. And we go in the weight room every day and we lift heavy and they're strong. Okay. And, like literally there's no skill to that. Get them to show.
Right. And I get that there's a beginning factor in there where GPP, general strength, is going to have the best carryover to the field of anything because you have weak athletes. Mm-hmm. But then you're going to hit a line that says, okay, now I need special strength training to get across this plateau.
You're using those special strength, quote unquote, things or some more what I would consider transferable movements. They're still getting strong because strength is so, it's really force production. I love Max Marzo. If you can get a chance to get him on, he's fantastic. But he said something about there isn't even such thing as strength. It's just force and newtons. And so if you can get them to a point where they're able to maximize their movement because of that strength, they're strong enough. They're strong enough.
Yeah, you get down to it, it's force through time. Mm-hmm. So that's what you got. I mean, who cares if you can squat 600 if it takes you forever to do it?
I know. And they're going to get stronger regardless. I had a kid come to me. He actually posted on Twitter, but he came in the other day. He's a sophomore. He benched 320 at the gym, put the video up, and then he came in and I was like, oh boy, he's going to want to, like, he's a 190-pound kid. He said, Coach, I'll tell you what. He said, my goal was to bench 320 before I graduated high school. He said, so I'm done chasing that number. I want to be fast, powerful, explosive, and just move the bar as fast as I can. I said, dude, let me tell you something. You're 15 going on 16. You just bench 320. Move the bar fast, powerful, and explosively, and just do that. And when you're a senior, you're probably benching 405 just because, that compensatory acceleration factor is just going to, you're just going to be able to move the bar and and just also, guess what's, you're in midst puberty. You haven't even hit like grown man strength yet. Like when you start getting in your early 20s, like don't worry about it. Don't, train for strength, but just use all the other factors to fill in that middle void of transfer, I think.
No, I was kind of thinking about this today. I'll get your opinion on it. Obviously, when you came there, your ideas were a little different than what was going on. It sounds like, the 1 rep max and stuff like that. So you bring new ideas. Not everybody is quick to gravitate. There's an evolution of it all, I'm sure. So using athletes similar to a library, like let's say like a podcast, you got to have a library. So when people find your podcast, they download 5 of your podcasts instead of 1. So you need to build athletes that create the library for you. So maybe it starts out this year, you got 2 athletes that did your program and are amazing. Well, the next year you had 4, and the next year you had 6. Well, then now all of a sudden your freshmen are seeing this library of guys that this training is working for. They're way quicker to buy in.
Yeah. I was very, very, very lucky because at almost every school I've ever been at before this, there was always a battle. Always a battle. There wasn't a lot of kids. When I first came to New York, there was a lot of kids wanted to, but I was very blessed to have had a really good friend of mine was a strength coach there before. So he had been gone for like 6 months. So I just had to kind of break 6 months worth of bad habits, but it was a battle. And it was still a little bit towards the end, even after 6 years. I came in the MCA, and luckily the head coach and I go way back, and he, basically said, you just tell me what we need to do, and that's what we'll do it. The kids were a little hesitant at first because they're like, we haven't done this, we haven't done that. But I can tell you that the type of kid at Metrolina Christian Academy, they're very, so they're great. They're not all great thinkers, but they look at things and they can recognize things that are going, you can't fool those kids. I can't, if I went in there and said, hey, we're going to do our PR and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and I can't show them, they're going to see through that. But the advantage of it is when those things are powerful tools, they also see that. And I think right up until, they were buying in and kind of doing, when we got to this week in spring practice, and all of a sudden things are happening fast out there. And I'm not going to take all the credit for this because they worked hard before I got there. And they had a great base of strength before I got there. So it was kind of just like molding that strength into what we wanted. And the head football coach is fantastic and works with them. When I'm not there, he's there. But this week I've had the coaches, parents, players all coming up to me and saying, we're so glad you're here. We look so much, we're moving around. And I think whether that's true or not, and I'm not trying to, from a buy-in standpoint, if you can show them this is where we're going. And then when you start to get there, like you have a spring practice and all of a sudden guys are moving well and guys are feeling good. And then I think I will not have any issues the rest of the time because they just, the older guys have really bought in, and the JV guys that I don't know as well because they weren't in weightlifting class. It was kind of like see them like once a week. They were kind of standing there like when I was getting them to do RPR and stuff, they're kind of like, wait, what are we doing? But they see the older guys doing it and it starts to roll in. But yeah, I think I'm blessed in that way because I have friends all over the country that tell me horror stories about what their head football coaches make them do or ask them to do or, like wanting them to do. And I'm just like, oh Lord, So, but I think you're right with that library analogy that you can get a few kids on board and get them going, you'll get most of them. You get most of them. And that's what we had at York. We have most of the kids understood that, there was going to be a time to lift heavy. There was going to be a time to hop, time to jump, a time to be bouncy, a time to clean, a time to sprint. And they just understood that, and that, hey, I might say we're going 65% for 3 or 0.75 meters per second. And yeah, you can get that more than 3 reps, but there's a plan. And I was very lucky that here that plan just came together very quick.
That's just something from past experience. I think I've learned, when we first started this, we had a couple athletes and they went on to do very well. Well, that wasn't enough because the kids look at it like, oh, he's just a freak. He would have been able to do that anyhow. But you trickle a couple more in, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second.
It probably comes down to the coaches as much as the kids.
There could be some truth to that.
You have coaches that are kind of standing in the background like, we're not lifting heavy enough weight. We're not spending enough time in the weight room. What are we doing all this silly breathing for? What are we doing all this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. We won all these championships and all we did was power clean every day. That hurts you. That hurts you because despite the fact that, and I've actually had to say this to, it wasn't a football coach. It was from a different sport, but that was trying to tell me what I could and couldn't do in class with the team. And I said, look, I'm the person the school hired to be the resident expert in this particular realm. You're the person the school hired to be the resident expert in your sport. I don't expect to ever be as knowledgeable about that sport as you are, and you will never be as knowledgeable about what I do as I am unless you quit your sport, go back to school, and start all over again. So let's just both do what we need to do for what's best for the kids. And I hated to be like that, but it just kind of got to that point. But I think coaches need to recognize that. If you can't, there are very, very few people. I can name about 5 that are outstanding head football coaches and really, really, really great performance coaches. You can be great at one and good at another, but to be great, here's another guy you need to interview. His name's Donnie Kiefer from West Ashley in South Carolina. He's the one that I always go to. He's great, but he's a unicorn. He's a unicorn. It's tough because the football coach has got to spend 80% of their life learning how to be great at football. They can't possibly spend the time that I can spend doing what I need to do. So that's the biggest battle is when you have coaches that don't recognize that. And instead they go back and say, well, this is what we've always done. And this is what there's a lot of different ways to do things. And the way we do it is probably going to change every single year a little bit based on a lot of different factors. So it's huge. If you get coaches like right now, it's amazing. I walk around practice and I'm coaching the receivers and the receivers coach is like, that's awesome, coach. Thank you. And it's Brian Quick. He played in the NFL. Like we have two NFL guys, recently retired NFL guys on our coaching staff, and both of them are like bought in immediately because they understand the value of performance. I think that's a huge key.
And then building on performance a little bit, like I said, I read quite a few of your Simplifaster articles, man, and they were great. I loved them. I would almost rather read somebody's articles than watch somebody on a podcast whenever I'm doing research. I don't know why. I just like reading the articles. But you were talking about spending the money on big adaptations before the bill is due. So essentially going nuclear on the work
Yeah.
when a grenade would do the job. I thought that was, that seems like common sense, but I don't know that it is.
It's not. It's not. I look at it like this. If you've got a kid coming to you, like these freshmen we got coming in, there's a couple that I'm kind of like, yeah, they work out, they got some training age, so we might need to bump them a little bit. Most of them, if all we did was push-ups and air squats, they would get significantly stronger. That's just the type of, we really have to develop kids at MCA. We really have to develop them and then hope a couple kids transfer in. That's kind of like what happens. But your core is that development group. And it would be silly for me to jump those kids up to, hey, let's go 85% for five sets of five on an exercise that you don't have any experience with, because now you're paying $5,000 for $1,000 car when you could have got the same adaptation for the 1,000, and then had that 4,000 in the bank to use later. I don't want to spend my savings if I don't have to. I want to spend exactly what I need to spend to get the product. And, that young training age, just first couple of years, if you don't think 1x20 will develop good looking, strong kids, you just need to run it with some 7th and 8th graders, maybe even some 8th and 9th graders, and get the coaches past the same exercises over and over again. Get the kids past and just get them on to, hey, you're trying to get your 20 to 23 rep, 18 to 23, whatever, and then add 5 and add 5. The next thing you know, you got your girls softball team has freshmen that are using 40s and 45-pound dumbbells on an incline bench, and you're just like, what just happened? And the kids, why would you jump ahead when you could just train them nice and slow? Like, who cares when a 9th grader back squats, or who cares when a 9th grader does anything? And like, he's in 9th grade. His body is going to change so much between now and his senior year. So yeah, that's a big thing for me. And we had it going pretty good at York because we had a 6th grade class, a 7th grade class, 8th grade class, and the 6th grade class didn't even have weight room. They were just in a PE room with jump ropes and, medicine balls and things they could slam, and it was phenomenal. And I'm hoping to it's a little bit different situation here, but I firmly believe that, you're chasing all these percentages with 8th and 9th graders, and you're like, for what? They're going to get strong doing anything, sleeping and eating. They're going to get significantly stronger. So let's teach them as many potential joint movement patterns as we can, teach it well, and get all the little movements in that are going to make them strong head to toe. So then when you start putting that barbell on there, they're more of a complete athlete than they were when you just go ahead and spend all the money up front.
And there was another article I read talking about another thing that should be common sense, but I don't know that it always is you get the monster you feed. So if you're feeding the kids, that we don't ever want to top out, we want to keep progressing, we want to keep this growing, that's what you get. Where if you feed something else, well, that's what you're going to get.
And that kind of goes back around to the whole 1 rep max thing. You start making that record board, what matters, and you're feeding power lifters instead of athletes. And you know what? It may not affect them. It may, but it's taking the emphasis off what's really important. Like I sometimes think that if you told a coach you could win the championship this year 100%, but you couldn't use a barbell one time, they'd be like, like, I don't know. Like, I just told you you'd win no matter what. You just can't lift the barbell. I don't know, coach. Power clean's really important. It's like, I think that's kind of a mindset that exists sometimes. Like, how about just doing whatever's going to help you be the best? But you don't know, and that's the argument. Like, there are some kids that power cleans probably will make better. And there are some kids that it will be a disaster. That's our job. It's not to say everybody's going to do this and everybody's going to do that. And we're all going to do the same thing. If you walk into our weight room, most times, especially when I was at York, when I had like 100 kids in there, sometimes there might be 7 different types of squats going on, because so that's our job. Like don't be the meathead guy that no matter what, we're going to deadlift, we're going to power clean, we're going to back squat, and we're going to bench press. I don't care. Well, I got news for you. Even if that's right for 7 out of 10 kids, there's 3 kids that aren't benefiting from that. And your job is to figure out what will benefit those 3 kids. So don't be so simplistic. Cody, he was funny. You were talking about him. We were joking around, and I said, sometimes you're sitting there talking about like using like a range. Like, I'm a big Caldita guy. And I was on there talking about range squats, and we were using some pin type squats. I think, or I can't remember exactly what it was. No, it wasn't pin squats. We were doing like quarter half squats on purpose, trying to get up. There was something we were doing, and we were doing it very intentionally, and we were in very specific body joint positions. I was using VBT to get a very specific adaptation, and I was so happy about it because the kids were just really dominated. And somebody comes on and says, they're not even squatting deep enough. Like, that's no good. They're not even squatting deep enough. And I said to Cody, I wanted to put it on Twitter, but if you just put it in writing, people get it wrong. They think you're being, I said, sometimes, I'm sitting there trying to play chess, and I'm thinking through every single move, and I make a really good move, and my opponent slaps his hand down and says, "Go fish." And we were kind of laughing about that, but that's sometimes how you feel. Like I go through, and all coaches do this, whether they're whoever they are, but if they're trying to be great at their job, whether they are or not, but they're trying, they are going to be painfully thinking through every single move. And that's what I do. People are like, I thought you were only going to work part-time at Metrolina. And I was like, I know, I'm there every minute. I'm not working for Simplifaster because that's just the way you do it. And then you have someone come on that probably has no clue about anything you're doing. And he's like, giving you a hard time about it. And you're just like, really? Like, put some thought into how you're going to attack each and every day to improve your athletes. Don't just say, well, they're not squat deep enough. They're not going to be good at sports. Like, I don't know that squat depth makes a lick of difference. It's an artificial, thing made up by people that were building up the sport of powerlifting, or, whatever they called it back then. But so, yeah, I think, that transfer piece is the big one.
Now, I was thinking about this the other day too, because I'm getting ready to take a couple of horses. I haven't taken any horses in a while, so I'm getting ready to take a couple to ride. And it just kind of dawned on me, you're working with kids, and kids are essentially a herd animal in a predator body. So with as much as you've worked with kids, how are you able to kind of get them out of that herd mentality and get them a little more aggressive and get them to step out of that comfort zone and kind of take advantage of their individualism and go for it.
That's a battle, because here's what high school kids, a lot of them they don't want to look, uh, especially where I'm at, they don't want to look a lot different. They don't want to be doing something different or out on a limb, taking a chance. And, it's just a communication and trust and relationship building. It all comes down, like, you'd probably be a lot better coach if you knew a lot less about, and I see people that I think this on Twitter all the time. You're an expert in your field, but you are clearly not a people person, like a relationship person, because you don't know how to talk to anybody, and I think you'd almost take less, especially with the high school, take less knowledge and more ability to build a relationship and communicate all day, because that's how you do it. When they trust you, you're their safety net. They're not going to walk on a tightrope without a safety net. So they're not going to do some of this stuff unless I'm there and they trust me and their friends trust me. And, like, that's how you do that. You've got to get them, out of, and then it becomes easier because they're all doing goofy looking stuff. That's how I tell them all the time. Someone's going to drive by our practice field and see that we're out there doing our neural nose touch to finger touch test to open our peripheral vision. They're probably going to be like, I thought they were practicing football. What are they doing? It's like, so you might look goofy, but if it improves your performance 1%, let's do it. And so once they have that relationship with you and they understand that that's going to improve the performance, that's a lot easier to do it. And it's really easy with girls, because female athletes, once you show that you really care about them, they will literally run through the wall for you. Males a little bit harder because of ego. There's way too many alpha males in the room sometimes. And you can't really say, like, you're going to do it because I'm that doesn't work with kids. They just tune you out. They don't care about that. They need to know that you're the alpha male in your specific realm based on that relationship, and they trust your knowledge and they see that you're bringing value to them. That's how they're going to get from being that predator back into the pack. We're still predators, but I'm the lead predator and you guys are the pack. But and it's just, you can't fight with them, or you're not going to win that. You have to build it. And I've been blessed that it's just kind of worked out that way pretty well for me at each of my last 3 or 4 stops. So particularly here, I had the head coach, kind of talked me up before I even came. So it was a little bit better, but that's it. Joe, you'd be surprised what humility and kind of some self, joking about yourself a little bit will loosen that and turn them. Because you know what? I mean, they ultimately all want to be the best they can be. There's just different layers you have to get through. And there's only one way to do it. That's build a relationship and communicate.
So let's turn that 180 and go to the parents. So now you have a predator that's ready to attack.
Yeah.
Now it sounds like you're doing well there, but it's probably not always been the case. How do you build that relationship with the parent to know that, hey, we really are doing the things that are in the best interest of your kids?
That's a tough one. I think that not being a football coach helps a lot, because I don't control their playing time. I don't get on them about, a lot of stuff. I think for the most part, I'm kind of the person they see that whether I'm doing it right or wrong, I'm helping their kid. That's been my experience. Um, to to convince them that all the things we're doing is right is impossible, you know? So I smile and answer questions if I need to, and I try to, build a relationship. But a lot of times, as a strength coach, you don't have to have a whole lot of negative things with parents because you're kind of like, if they get mad about something, you're like, I don't coach football. He's over there, you know? Or, most of the conversations I have with parents are either like, my kid just loves what you're doing, or, Coach, how can we gain weight? Things like that. Usually when the parent comes on looking angry, they walk right past me and they're looking for the head coach. So,
All right. That makes sense. Yeah. You're there in a capacity only to help in the parents' eyes.
and you don't control playing time, so they're not mad at you. If their kid didn't play, they look at me like, well, he's been working his butt off for Coach Hoover. How come he's not playing? And the head coach has to tell him because he's not good. Like if he was good enough, he'd be playing, so, but
Now, going into you a little bit, we've talked parents, we've talked kids, we've talked other coaches and all that, but you really, I don't know your personality just a little bit. We've talked, so I don't know you that well, but putting yourself out there. I mean, you're on Twitter, you write for Simplifaster, you're doing podcasts, you're doing all this stuff, becoming comfortable with both sides of it, the people that love what you're doing, but the people that are ultimately criticizing what you're doing. How are you able to overcome some anxiety with that and kind of thrive the way you have been?
well, I look at it like this. There was a time when I was coaching football and I was like your typical meathead, like guy that, did things like some people do now still, and then I walked into a room and I was able to have a great mentor in Ethan Reeve, who was at Wake Forest, and, he's retired now, but I walked into his room and that was the last day that I felt like I knew much of anything. And since then, I've just been chasing answers to questions that lead to other questions that lead to other questions. So I look at it like this. I'm probably not doing things the best that I can do right now, but it's the best way that I know in this moment. And I'm sure that I'll learn new things and get better every single day. So if someone wants to judge or be critical, I mean, that's fine. You better know my perspective and you better know my situation and you better know all the things that are going on before you can judge what I'm doing with my athletes. So I don't really stress too much about it. If someone thinks I'm wrong, they'll let me know. But as long as I have a why for everything I do, and I don't do anything without asking why and having a solid answer. And I think as long as you do that, it's kind of hard to worry about people being critical. Now, if you're trying to teach me something, I mean, I had an athlete do something that probably wasn't smart to have him do with a tsunami bar. I thought, hey, let's try an altitude drop with the tsunami bar, and that might be fine. But, I was lucky that I'm close enough with Coach Mike Boyle that he sent me a message and he said, hey, I don't think it's a very good movement, and, you could open yourself up to some liability. You need to think about it. And you know what? I went back and thought about it. I said, yeah, you know what? Right. We probably, we can do altitude drops with a little bit different way. That might not be the best way. So I have a real positive response to that type of, but anyone else, I don't care. Like if you want to teach me something, that's great. But, if not, if you don't like what I do, then just scroll past.
Yeah. Just understanding that, hey, if you're enjoying what you're doing, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Hopefully other people like it, but if they don't, It is what it is. So I know you got an evening planned ahead of you and you got other things to do, but I'll kind of get to wrapping up on maybe this question here. But writing for Simplifaster, coming up with continual content and getting your ideas on paper, I'm sure that's a process you've worked through and kind of got to where you are now. But how are you able to keep moving ahead and coming up with great articles?
Well, it's funny you say that because I haven't written an article in a couple months now. The last one I did was my experience down at Tony Vellani's place XPE in February, and I was supposed to write one about my experience at the draft, or at the draft combine, and I got about 3 paragraphs in and just hit a wall. So I'm kind of in that writer's block type thing right now. But I think ideas just pop into my head about something that I'm interested in. And then I just kind of go down a rabbit hole with it. And I have experience. It's funny, my original bachelor's degree was in communications and public relations. So I had a background in writing. Anyway, so it just, I don't really plan out articles. I just kind of sit down and have an idea. And then, they used to, when I had more time, when I wasn't working for them full time, they would actually assign me topics and say, hey, would you do this? And I'd say, yeah. So I'd have to sit down and come up with an outline and fill it in and kind of, go back and forth. But honestly, probably most of my articles the last year or two were just, I read something on Twitter or somewhere, heard somebody say something, and it led me to ask questions, and it led me to want to share an article, or someone asks me about, how we're using GPS, or how we're using this, or how we're using, and I just start typing. So it's not as glamorous, as some writers might have, where I just kind of literally sit down and start typing. And sometimes I just won't stop until it's done. I'll knock out an article. If it's something really that I'm really passionate about, I'll knock it out 2-3 hours, and I'll send it to Nathan, and he'll send it back. And he's a great editor and asks great questions about, I'll fill it in. And then sometimes, like currently, nothing's popping in there. So I'm not really writing anything right now. I would guess that it'll come back around. And so that's kind of my process. It's not anything in depth or, it's just, I think writing is kind of a God gifted talent for me. I mean, I did learn some formal stuff, but I'm blessed with the gift of gab, and I can put that on paper. So
Now, anytime I have somebody on that writes articles or wrote books, I always like to ask that question because it's interesting to me and what the process is, because everybody's different. I would think your process would probably be a little closer to what mine would be, but
yeah, I just wing it. It's like somebody said to me, no kidding, somebody said to me, and I can't even imagine anybody would want this, but someone said, man, you should write a book. And I was like, let me tell you something. I heard another mentor of mine, Gary Schofield, say one time, everybody, I might have said to him, hey, why don't you write a book? And he said, because by the time I got to the end of the 3rd chapter, I would have made so many changes in my process and adjustments that I would have to go back, and then I'd never get it. And that's exactly right. I'm always chasing knowledge and always trying to improve myself. So what I'm saying is optimal right now could very well, your base beliefs don't change. There's a few watershed moments in your life where, oh, this is going to change my life. When I learned about to get out of the weight room, 18, 20 years ago, get out of the weight room, and sprinting is important. And then, hey, you can develop speed exactly like you do in the weight room with detailed, plans. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, agility and change of direction is the next thing that's, so there's those big watershed moments, but for the most part, the little things are going to change so much that it would really be hard to put anything on paper, because it's like, I could very well find a better way of doing something, I'll pop on a Cal Dietz video and from 5 years ago, and he'll be talking about something I hadn't seen before, and I'll be like, oh man, I need to try that. And I'll say, hey, that works really well. And it's like we went from 8 to 17 kids since February, broad jumping over 9 feet. I've never had that happen before, and I'm going back and trying to figure out exactly why that happened, and so we can try to see if that is going to continue to work. And a lot of those things are things that I adjusted, that I am doing differently here because of a lot of the individual things that I got going on in MCA that I didn't have at York. So it's always a process.
And, that's the one kind of thing about that could be a little scary about where society is right now, is they want to hold you to an idea that you had,
Yeah.
a long time ago. Well, everybody changes.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's getting to the point now where there's probably some things in those articles I wrote that I've changed a lot. I've adjusted a lot of, I don't know if I wrote an article about using the Soviet wave system, with this called the system or not, but I used that by the book for a long time. And then I started to make adjustments that I felt like were better for us. And so that article, if I wrote it, I think I did 4 or 5 years ago, is probably outdated now. So, and I have people like reach out and say, hey, I read this article. And I'm like, oh man, that was like the second article I wrote. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. It's just your process of growing and finding Mike Boyle said that on a podcast. He said, everybody thinks what they're doing in the moment is the best way of doing it because that's the best way at that moment. Things are going to change. And I think I pride myself on, I'm not bouncing all over the place, but if I see something that I think can improve something, even a little bit, that's gonna, or at least gonna give it a try. So yeah, things change fast.
Yeah, especially in the strength and conditioning world. When you look back over the course of history, we haven't even really been doing this to the scale we're doing it for 100 years. I mean, I guess you could go back to force times mass and acceleration. Maybe the German rocket guys were working with that in the 40s, but these formulas aren't that old.
And the research people were like, this is definite. There was that whole thing on eccentrics or whatever the other day, whole big thing. And I was looking at it and I was like, the dude said, don't use this for athletes. And you look and it's a study done on elite soccer players in season. So you're saying don't do that for any athlete, no matter what's going on. So I was kind of like asking people about it, like, I don't know about that. And I was lucky, really lucky. I had one of the most famous, big time strength coaches in history into my room the other day with Joe Ken, came in, and I kind of knew, and I was like, what do you think about that? He was like, that's ridiculous. Like, how did, like these, you got a coach, like these guys that throw out research articles and then make absolutes and don't even coach anybody, he's like, I don't know that guy, but maybe he does, but he's like, I wouldn't, I got a lot of questions about that. So the key point of that was I got a lot of questions about that, because how can you just, look at one thing and say, this is absolute, and you're talking about 100 years, maybe, it's, we don't have any idea. We haven't even tapped in all this brain stuff that people are doing now. We haven't even tapped into it yet. It's, I even with a lot of the research, obviously there's things that are set in stone and everybody knows these things actually happen. But a lot of the performance research, you kind of like, and I'm not a research but it's like, I'd rather use the anecdotal evidence that I have on my situation to make those judgments, as opposed to, some study done in some country that and we got guys who have never coached a day of high school United States team, like sport kids, saying this, saying that, you know what? You have no idea what it's like in my room. And it just goes back to that. The field is so young that it's really hard to put any stock in any absolutes. And I really try not to speak in absolutes. I think it kind of shows a lack of depth and an over egotistical, attitude that is probably not really useful.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, athletes are changing all the time. So it's hard to be in an absolute. The kid of today is not the kid of 20 years ago, and that kid's not the kid of 20 years before that. So progression is always going to have to be made.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. For sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, Coach. I appreciate the time. I had a wonderful time talking to you.
That's like an hour and 45 minutes long. I don't know if anyone's going to listen to me for that long, but I appreciate it, man. Good talk.
Either they will or they won't. It
kind of let me just be a grumpy old man. That was fun.
Well, nobody wants to hear my opinions. I don't have any credentials, but they obviously love the coaches. So we'll just keep going down this path.
Yeah, it's great, man. I really appreciate it. That was fun, and I hope that I did a good job.
I think you did. So I'll let you have your evening, and
all right.
Anytime that you want to come back on, let me know.
I will. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.